So, Michael Garfield, thank you for doing the Ordinary Visionaries interview. Really glad to have you here. I think we're going to have a really interesting conversation. So,
Thank you,
let's
Robert.
start with the question I ask everybody. How are you an ordinary visionary? Or, even as you said on your form, you are how do I put it, a visionary futurist. You've done a hell of a lot of things.
Yeah, I have. And I think that's because what I thought I was going to be doing with my life didn't pan out. And so I had to learn to, as my former colleague, Will Tracy at the Santa Fe Institute, and uh, Brian Arthur, also economist Brian Arthur, are both fond of saying there's a Chinese uh, aphorism, I guess, or that you feel your way across the river stone by stone. That when you depart from the score, then you really have to listen to what the other musicians are playing, and so you move out of a you leave a model or a script, and you move into a mode of being that is more sensitive to what is emerging moment to moment. And so I found myself very convinced, like through my entire childhood, that I was just going to grow up and become a dinosaur scientist. Like a lot of kids say that, but like I was in it. I was doing the field work until I was
Like Ross from
20.
Friends.
Right. Hypothetically. I
Right.
mean, I was in Wyoming every summer as a teenager doing dinosaur field work with Robert Bacher. And then when his nonprofit fell apart, was around the time I was getting out of my undergraduate program at the University of Kansas. And I had found transpersonal psychology and complex system science. And suddenly the group that I was convinced I was going to work with for the rest of my life didn't exist. And then I had fallen in love with someone and nothing made sense anymore. And so I had application letters to grad schools in hand. And I was like, I don't even know. I don't know what to do with these. Like I don't know who I am anymore. And since then,
Well,
it's just been this thing of like, I
what year
think
was that?
that was 2005.
Okay. So
So for
almost
the
20
last
years.
19 years, yeah,
Yeah.
for almost 20 years, I've been living the question instead. Um, and I think in a way it has prepared me to be, to model a way of being that I think becomes more prominent or becomes more obviously valuable or strategic in times when familiar institutions and structures and worldviews stop making as much sense as they did. So I think that's where the ordinary visionary, comes in, is just that uh, when we have fewer givens to depend on, then we benefit from becoming more sensitive to what seems to be taking shape over the horizon, you know?
So I read your bio and I looked at your website that you have. Each of those things in your website is like a lifetime for some people. I mean, music and art and science and AI and this and that. So how how have you been making a living for the last few years? Who pays you or how do you get paid?
Right now, I am working on a leap of faith move because I was doing science communication for 5 years at the Santa Fe Institute, explaining to people uh, how to think about adaptive systems about, the ways that an economy is like a brain, is like an ecosystem, is like, condensed matter, the fundamental stuff. And that was fascinating work. That was really, drinking from the fire hose of really profound and illuminating research, work on, epidemic simulation and, computational social science. But it wasn't scratching the itch for me as an artist, and to be a translator and a synthesist of that work left little room for my own ideas and contributions.
Right.
And so I left that last year, and I spent some time at a stealth AI startup in Mozilla, doing research on innovation. But yeah, to your point now, it's like right now, my main interest is in taking everything that I've learned and applying it to the question of who are we and what is the nature of our agency in a highly technological world, and how can we get better at imagining what is possible and allocating our attention into that possibility, and how do we tell better stories that are fun, that are interesting, that are inspiring, that recruit one another into the concerted effort toward the futures that we actually want to live together. And who pays for this is itself kind of an open question. I have a handful of small private donors and small grants to pursue this project, Humans on the Loop, which launches in the first week of December.
Oh, right around the corner. And
Yeah,
what is that going to be and look like, and who's going to be involved with that?
So it starts as a series of conversations like this one, and a series of essays, reflections, personal writing. I'm going to grow it up into live salons. Eventually I'll take what we've got and distill it into a book. I'll use it to train a language model that will provide people with a like an oracle. Like I'm really interested in. I just published this piece on the language model that someone wrote for the podcast that I currently host. I'm about to rebrand. The podcast Future Fossils, where someone took 220 episodes of the show and boiled it down into an interactive interface. And you can ask it these questions. You can ask it questions about things that we never even talked about on the show, and it'll give you these really thoughtful, profound answers that are, in some sense, the distillate of the hundreds of people I've spoken to and everything that we know in our life experience. And what I'm learning is that these tools that allow us to interact with large amounts of data and to bring it into the human scale, to make it sensible to us, to allow us to probe it and investigate it, are like, it's like if you chose the size of the mirror and the spectrum of light that was reflected through it, and I guess the best analogy I've heard is that we used to use paper maps. I relied on paper maps as an adult navigating San Francisco, on foot, backpacking, in 2008. Days. Yeah, I was like, I'm here. I'm using a Sharpie on a laminated map, and that map as a fixed scale object. And then Google Maps allows you to, do the sort of powers of 10, like zoom in and out, and, go from satellite view, see it, which frame do you want? What functional objects, what prominent features do you want it to emphasize? And something like that is going on right now with the way that we can use machine learning and related technologies to investigate individuality at whatever scale, meaning me as a person, my family, my neighborhood, my city, the network of economic and ecological relationships in which I am embedded and from which I emerge, the nation, the planet. Peter Gabriel has this song on his latest album called Panopticon, which I love this idea that he's playing around with the same thing, which is rather than the Jeremy Bentham's Panopticon, this prison where, there's a central observation tower and all the prisoners are in a cylinder around it and everyone's being observed all the time.
Sounds lovely.
What if it's that's what we've got, but what if it's inverted? What if all of this data that's being produced by atmospheric and climate research and, economic research and, health and medical data, and anonymized and aggregated, and I saw somebody mapped Blue Sky, the social network, the 13 million users of Blue Sky. They drew a graph of like the relationships on that platform, or if people listening to this have ever seen a map of all of the websites on the internet, and how it looks like this rhizome. It looks like the fungal networks undergirding a forest. And it's just like, to see what Timothy Morton calls the hyper object, to see this thing that is so big that we couldn't actually wrap our heads around it, and to suddenly be able to wrap our heads around it is potent and transformative. And I really, whatever else might be said of the challenges wrought by technological change, it's like a mirror, right? Like we did this. We're better off for being able to pick the food out of our teeth. We're better off for being able to like check in. And of course, some people get lost in the mirror and they become, self-obsessed and weird. And, that's something that seems like we always have to struggle with. But overall, I think we got a real boon of potential here.
Yeah, no kidding. I've gotten into ChatGPT like ridiculously amount in the last year. It's been insane. But I'm amazed how, only really a small percentage of people actually use that. And of that, there's only a subset that really uses it in any expansive way. Because, most people aren't walking around with deep questions. We're walking around with, how do I make enough money to live? How do I survive? How do I get along with my partner? What TV shall I watch tonight? I mean, we all have these issues. Most people don't dig very deep into themselves, their lives, whatever. That doesn't mean we can't. I mean, you do, obviously, probably more than me. So, I don't usually ask this question of people, but what is the future of humanity from your perspective? I mean, you think about these things, you look at these kind of things, you see how, we have access. I've been watching a lot of videos on robotics recently. You take AI and then you attach it to this machine that probably after I'm dead, but these things are going to be pervasive. Hopefully not take us over. But anyway, what is the, what do you, where do you see us going as a race? And is it good or bad? I mean, I'm sort of, I think it's kind of a toss up. Utopia or oblivion, as Buckminster Fuller said, right?
I mean, coming out of evolutionary biology, coming out of a lifelong acquaintance with deep time and the cycles of planetary history, I am left with an appreciation for the fact that we, as a planet, the big we, continue to find new ways to live together, to turn trash into food, to rethink things in a very fundamental way, to make the most of what is possible. And we also, like, no corner of that giant collective process of search and discovery and creation is cognizant enough of the landscape of what Stuart Kaufman calls the adjacent possible to be able to prevent or like avert catastrophe, right? So, there's probably the most robust definition of evolution available to us is grounded in physics. It's grounded in thermodynamics. It's grounded in the idea that we are making use of available energy as, that life evolves to mitigate uncertainty and to, for lack of a better word, exploit available energy as much as possible. And that in so doing, we become more speciose and diverse and heterogeneous. And that's, on average, something I find really hopeful. That's the long arc, but it's also the case that that process of recombinant novelty production generates its own crises. It generates its own challenges from the inside. I think a lot about one of the lesser known extinction events on the history of the Earth was the evolution of flowers. It's like, nobody wants to give up flowers, but flowers disrupted all terrestrial ecosystems profoundly. And at the end of the Jurassic, beginning of the Cretaceous period, they transformed everything. Suddenly we have, millions of species of beetles and other, pollinating birds and other weird critters, these exquisite, hyper specialized networks of things that are growing together, and, fruit and all of the new, phytotoxins like alkaloids that came out of the evolution of angiosperms. But that decimated the ecosystem upon which basically, Stegosaurus and its ilk were living on, this coniferous world, cycads and monkey puzzles and, just evergreens. And now, now that stuff's been marginalized. I don't know if that answers your question, except to say that I think that, like, the future of the human specifically, I think I'm not a doomer. I'm not a techno optimist. I see evolution moving in these, like, the major evolutionary movements in Earth history are when new metabolisms emerge through the reproductive coupling of entities that were in, either predator and prey, parasite, host, or were in some way at odds with one another, and that, their balance is brought together into some sort of new unity. The emergence of multicellularity, or the emergence of the oxygen metabolism as a way of dealing with the waste products of photosynthesis, or, mushrooms learning to eat wood so that the surface of the continents is not just fallen logs. And so, like, I see the future of humankind as being a negotiation with the world, the rest of the non-human world, and a new balance with that. And, I don't think we were ever in control. I think remembering that we're not in control is important, and that, we're gearing up for a period of, like, somehow both unprecedented power and also humility, like a stewardship rather than dominion.
That would be nice, but we seem to be a dominion-oriented species.
It doesn't serve us.
Well, it does in a certain way, yeah. You familiar with the work of Gurdjieff? I studied his work for years. But one thing he said was the only evolution for man is the evolution of consciousness. So if we look at man and don't think of consciousness, we have, stuff just happens. We want to accumulate. We want to be powerful. We want to succeed. We want to thrive. All these kind of things. And none of that takes any particular increase of consciousness. We've gotten where we are given what we have. And we have a lot of positive attributes, but we have selfishness and greed and anger and, all the negative things. And despite all that we've created, we don't know how to get rid of war. I mean, you think that would be pretty simple, but it's obviously not. No one's figured it out. War is a very big industry, with, a multi-trillion-dollar industry. We've discovered all these ways to kill people, but have we learned? Yeah, and obviously we've learned ways to cooperate with people. Look at our magnificent creations. But I sometimes wonder with artificial intelligence if that can facilitate the expansion of consciousness or not. Just more data, more information, more things doesn't necessarily change who we are.
Right. But I will say I'm quite fond of the work of Primavera de Filippi, Harvard, Berkman Klein.
Most of these people you'll mention, I have no clue about, given I'm not an academic. But
this is a trail of crumbs here, but yeah,
yeah,
she's got this idea that we can have what she calls the collaboration monster. There's this idea that was put out by Scott Alexander of the Slate Star Codex and Liv Poiret, this idea of Moloch, the god of all against all, that we're in this, zero-sum competition. And Primavera de Filippi is saying, well, we can actually use AI to coordinate, like, in the way that it took the evolution again of like glycolytic oxygen-based metabolism to say, okay, this is not just atmospheric pollution and poisonous off-gassing of the sort of proto-industrial processes of photosynthesis, but like this can actually be taken up into something that is nourishing and life-giving. That there are ways that we can learn to coordinate diverse needs such that we're not locked in conflict. And it just takes, I mean, I'm a fan of, again, like antagonistic cooperation as a strategy, that seeing things differently from one another is good so long as we recognize that there is some sort of higher principle or unifying framework within which we are all bent into service toward a common goal. Everybody, my dad, who worked in the travel industry for over 40 years, he said, no matter where he went in the world, that everyone wanted the same thing, which was a better world for their kids. And if you can just start at the top like that, if you can just say, look, what are the principles of flourishing? What does it actually take? Then we can start to devise systems that afford some kind of metabolism whereby we all get, I mean, and again, like, it's not like the world before humans was, some rosy, idyllic place, right? There's tons of violence and conflict. This is not something we invented.
Yeah.
But we're not going to fix it. We're not going to end suffering.
Well, not on a global civilization scale, perhaps. I mean, that kind of change only comes from personal work. We try to work to be better people. We try to work to be more aware, or we don't. I mean, a lot of people only work to get more. I mean, that's what their game is. More cooperation, more love, more whatever,
I think, you look at a cancer, right? A cancer is extremely glucose hungry because it is suffocating, because its metabolic processes have been disrupted in some way that cancer cells don't respond to signals from the body to self-terminate because they're in some sort of crisis it's an existential crisis, at the level of either cheating the body because something is broken And you look at all of the, all of the different ways that can be analogized to the behavior of human civilization, through greed and addiction and this, this drive to expand and conquer. And it's like, well, it's coming from a lack. It's coming from something that's not in harmony at the fundament. And I don't demonize the cancer cell. I think there's good evidence that structural adjustments in the body can kind of like rehabilitate cancerous expressions. And so that's what I'm looking forward to is a sense of how do we put into place steering mechanisms? How do we start to rebalance? Multi-scale regulation is one of the major questions of Humans on the Loop. If you think about sort of top down and bottom up, the being able to do, like you said earlier, being able to do the inner work, being able to ask these questions is a privilege. It's a privilege on the one hand. It's a privilege of having the time, the space, the structural support to be able to engage in inquiry. On the other hand, if you think of survival, success, and significance as a developmental arc, then we miss the ways in which survival is a term. I think that's the conditions of success at that layer. And in order to survive, in order to succeed at survival, one must orient oneself in the landscape in such a way as to balance, to bring oneself into right relationship with one's surroundings. And so you're not, there's a way in which all of these things are reflected in one another. Like I think that, this is kind of back where we started about, living the question being a strategy for an era in which easy answers are less given or less available, is that the process of inquiry or the process of meaning making becomes more obviously part of what it simply means to exist as, for instance, a company that is facing regular successive disruption by technological forces that you can't keep up with, or political surprises of various kinds. You just, I don't know.
Well, a company is a conglomeration of systems and individuals, each with their own particular needs. And most are just wanting to get a paycheck and survive. And most employees don't have really high thinking about the bigger picture, and et cetera, et cetera. So for me, it always comes back to consciousness. That's the thing I've been interested in since high school. How come some people with great privilege or means uh, aren't necessarily happy. I mean, you can have very rich people that are incredibly miserable. You can have very poor people that are very happy. So, we look at, if only we could figure everything out externally, then everybody would be happy, which is, on the face of it, insane. There's no evidence for that whatsoever. You know, material success is great in so many ways, but human flourishing, where you're really where, and so anyway, the question I've always had is, well, how can I be? What is the essence of being in that place where I can really flourish? And the main thing that I figured out is you don't flourish when you're rejecting what is, and you flourish when you're accepting what is. I mean, that's what the sages have told us. Here we are. Don't worry, be happy. Then let's figure out how to do whatever we do. But we're always chasing to make things better and have more stuff and build more complexity and do 10 zillion things, but it only gets us so far,
Mm-hmm.
And here we are in a political situation where we've elected Trump again, and it's part of us says, is how is that even possible? Why wouldn't we expand to some different possibility?
I mean, you can look to just Future Shock, I think, for that. I think I hesitate to get too political here, but I think it's clear that maybe there are two different kinds of people that vote for a disruption to the order. Those are some of them are people that want a return to what was, that feel like they've lost something that they wish to regain.
Right.
And others are aware that they desire a kind of break with the order, that they're willing to, I see a lot of desperation or frustration in, if we pull this down, then it gives us a chance for something else to emerge. I don't know. I try to maintain a state of what Jonathan Keats called negative capability, or of not knowing about all this stuff. It's hard to listen to the news, but I think we're at a moment where I am being drawn into a deeper practice of care and of listening and of making an effort to understand, because polarization is not working for anyone, as far as I can tell. And neither, for that matter, is placing responsibility for the production of story on the hands of so few individuals. With every election, I keep thinking about, maybe this will be the one where we finally decide as a country that we are ungovernably large and that we need to do more to tend to our own backyards, that we need to do more to take care of ourselves rather than to expect centralized authority to clean up after, like all the people that were left stranded after Katrina or Helen. It's like, there's a sense in which my friend David Savage, who's a professional empath, recently said perhaps the best thing that you can offer the world right now is a regulated nervous system. It's like, stop expecting it's like stop expecting the government. Like when people talk about regulation, they're usually talking about the government regulation. They're not talking about, vagal tone. They're not talking about, your own ability to maintain grace and equanimity and to assume responsibility for your own life in the face of an unfathomable world. And I think, again, with this, like the cancer metaphor, it's like, the reason we are so out of balance is because we have destroyed so many of the negative feedback mechanisms that were evolved over millions or billions of years to prevent the over-proliferation of, any one strategy in the biosphere. And so what does it look like? We probably can't design our way back into, we can't innovate our way back into a situation in which all of this is held in balance. I actually, I place a lot of my coin, as it were, on humility, like epistemic humility, on the ability of the planet to regulate itself, and as something the planet is doing, I just do my best to affect that at the level of my own life, because most of this has never been and will never be in our control.
And yet, I just wrote an article for highlighting the work of two young people that are producing miraculous results in ways that governments couldn't. And one is a guy named blanking on his name, but he has a organization called the Charity Water, and Charity Water is committed to providing fresh water for everyone in the world. And there's a lot of countries where fresh water is very hard to do. And he figured out how to do it and how to raise the money, and they've built 171,000 wells in the last 15 years or so. And they're on their way to reaching that goal. I mean, um, so you look at someone with that kind of focus. And then the other one is a young man who started at 16 years old to figure out how to clean up the plastic in the ocean. And they're in the process of doing that. They developed the technology and the boats and these straining systems where they go out and with a ship on each end, and they gather it up, and then they take the plastic and transfer it into plastic that can be used in manufacturing. They say within the next 10, 15 years, the oceans will be 95% free of plastic. You see, and those are just two examples that are exciting to me because those are really so fundamental that we don't completely destroy our oceans and then people have enough water to drink. And you look at the ridiculous amount of creativity these days, it seems to be just exploding. So that sort of gives me hope that, this kid, I mean, is a smart kid, obviously. He's from Holland. He figured this out when he was a teenager. He did a TED Talk about it and started to get money anyway. So, and this is just two people with an incredibly focused vision. And isn't that how everything starts? Every company? Yeah, we really need that.
We need that. We need that. At the same time, like, those are people that are seeing what they can do and doing it.
Yeah.
At this, and the biosphere isn't waiting on people to figure it out. There are microbes in the ocean and in the human body now that are digesting plastic that did not exist when you and I were born.
Seriously.
So it's like,
that's interesting.
Now that we know that, how can we recruit them into our ventures? It's like, I think, this sort of seeing it as one way or another thing is what's broken. Seeing us as operating on the planet rather than a vector by which the planet is operating on itself, I think creates a dilemma. But yeah, I am very lucky to be in the cohort of people, grantee programs at O'Shaughnessy Ventures and at Cosmos Ventures, where I'm seeing, brilliant people who are being given a leg up and doing work that has real, transformative potential. And it's a crisis and a tragedy that there are so few programs like these that make it possible for people to take a good idea and run with it and, make a difference in the world that is not necessarily based on the ability to attract, venture funding at from day zero.
Yeah.
But I think, the more people are empowered to build and to create and to dream, the more we, the information infrastructure and the miniaturization of industry enables people to go from the idea to the thing Like, this is why I do what I do, because I really believe that we need to get better at accepting the fact that we are so capable. And starting to, like, rather than starting from the assumption of, if only it were possible, starting from a kind of a thought experiment of, if I could do whatever I wanted, if I could contribute to the world in a way that satisfied me and made the world a better place, and I knew that were tangible, then what? And in my case, it took stepping away from a really well-paying job to feel like I could ask these questions with integrity. Not everyone can do that. My life conditions remain precarious. Raising children in this world is insane. But I have to make a bid on the world being the kind of place that I want it to be. If I act like it can't be, that it won't be, then I'm not making it easier for people to believe that it is.
Right. So what's your biggest vision? Not just a pie in the sky, but, here's something I would like to contribute, a difference I'd like to make, when I'm gone. Have I left a mark that, not for my ego, but for the benefit of humanity, has really made a difference?
The biggest thing that I would like to see is a marked uptick in the capacity of people to engage the unfamiliar, the unknown, the disruptive, the strange, with a sense of curiosity and a spirit of play, and a willingness to engage. And that's really where I try to do the work. Is, my vision of the future is one in which people lean in and ask how we can engage wicked, insoluble problems rather than solve them, rather than fix things, to, like you said, to accept, to start from a place of living with and working with, kind of a marriage contract with the complexity of our lives. Because all of this, all this movement into more and more complexity is really just the paradoxical outcome of us trying to make things simpler for ourselves, more convenient. And if we start from the assumption that it's always been a mystery and a puzzle, and it will remain so, then we free ourselves up to allow the world to surprise us in wonderful ways. And, I know my kids are going to face challenges that I can't imagine. I want them to face the world with gratitude and wonder.
A lot of this comes back to how our kids are educated. the school system itself? Is it just a factory to give people, you know, I'm someone that did not like school. By the time I got to high school, I I felt it was all a big, I'm not sure what word I used, but I pretty much hated it and couldn't wait till I got out of it, you know. And college was not an option. It's like, why would I go into college after this nightmare of high school? Obviously, it wasn't your experience, but it was for me. So I didn't feel it nurtured my creativity and who I was as a person, and just
It was my experience. I hated high school.
really, yeah.
I hated it. My high school was designed by the same architectural firm that made Columbine High School.
Hmm.
And that's a firm that specializes in prisons and does schools on the side. So
let's
I had
design our high
dreams.
schools like prisons. Perfect model.
Of course, it's a factory farm. I mean, I had dreams of leading a revolution after I graduated, going back and liberating everyone else in the school.
Yeah.
But into what is the question,
Yeah.
There's that scene in E.T. where he frees all the frogs from the biology class,
Oh,
It's
yeah.
like, what? So they can jump into the traffic?
Yeah, exactly.
It's like that. Then what? Then what do you do? This is getting back to that political question of like, okay, so you're going to knock the tree over. What have you made sure grows in its place?
Right.
Think about what you're destroying. And what could be made better. Yeah. I don't know. Yeah. Education's a mess, but it's an interesting time. Like learning. I just interviewed Howard Rheingold for Humans on the Loop, and Howard, former Stanford professor, author of Net Smart, really wild, bold, provocative, interesting figure. And, he's like, learning happens horizontally. Learning happens between people, and we're actually in a better position to learn outside of the institution of education than we have been in a very long time. I don't know that I'm ready to pull my kids out of public schooling quite yet, but like, I'm not as convinced that they need to go to college in order to live fulfilling and fruitful, interesting, flourishing lives as my parents were of my generation.
Right. Well, we've covered some kind of big issues here. I don't know if we've solved anything, but it's nice to talk to someone who's a real thinker and who's considered, some very deep things about society, science, education, all of these things. And it comes down to, for me, it's like, how will I live today in a way that I'm happy, fulfilled, managing the difficulties of my life with some degree of grace, and we're given, we're given our background. We didn't choose it. We didn't choose where we were born or who our parents would be or what school we went to or what would happen to us. So it's an adventure.
That's the Peter Pan thing, right? With death. It's like an awfully great adventure. Face it. He was a little more willing to face death than he was growing up. Kind of a funny
Right.
paradox there. But yeah, it's like the world is bigger than. I like, again, this is cliche, but like George Box, all models are wrong, but some are useful. It's like, what is the most useful story that we could tell ourselves? Don't start by asking if it's true. Start by asking if it helps.
Right.
Does it help other people? Does it help you get along in the
Right.
world with other people?
Right.
With yourself? I appreciate talking to you too. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you.